talking with Andrew McCarthy about his book, Willful Blindness. So who is guilty of being willfully blind?
Well, I think it would be easy to blame the government for its willful blindness. There certainly was enough of it. I mean, in the Nosair incident that I mentioned, there was a conscious decision made, even though there was immense evidence that he was a member of a much bigger Islamic terror network, to regard him as a lone crazed gunman and to discount the possibility that that was religiously motivated violence. When you have a number of incidents like that over a number of years, and, we have instances of the FBI conducting surveillance and shutting it down against these guys in the 1980s. We have the CIA basically providing funding for what turns out to be jihadist networks in Afghanistan in connection with the Mujahideen against the Russians in the 1980s. And then finally the business with Nosair and the lead up to the Trade Center bombing. You can look at and locate a lot of places where the government dropped the ball, but it's not just the government who really remains willfully blind. There's two things I think thematically I try to convey in the book. One is that we just simply have to come to terms with the fact that the ideology that is fueling all of the terrorism that has challenged us in the last 15 years is not, as we would like to think it is, some marginalized ideological code which is confined to a few fringe lunatics who have, as we like to put it, hijacked an otherwise peaceful religion. Radical Islam or fundamentalist Islam or political Islam or whatever it is that we're calling it this week to, try to suggest that it's something other than Islam that is the root of all this. This particular strain of Islam goes back 14 centuries. It's a very systematic ideology. It's one that embraces not only religious principles, but also social and political principles. It strives to be an all-purpose system for living, not just a set of religious creed or religious principles. And importantly, it has commanded the fealty, the adherence of tens of millions of people, and still does, over the 14 centuries. It has commanded the fealty of rich and poor, old and young, educated and uneducated. I just think it's a terrible mistake for us to think that it's just a few fringe Looney Tunes who basically are responsible for all of the terror that we are confronted by. It's something that empirically doesn't make sense, since we've seen, riots on demand and all kinds of terrorist acts globally for certainly the last 15 years. But it's also something that just simply is not true. There are tens of millions, probably hundreds of millions of people out of the total 1.4 billion of the world's Muslims who share this ideology. It doesn't mean that they will all become terrorists, but many people who would not themselves cross the line into terrorist activity actually do share the goals of the fundamentalists, which are to establish Sharia law in any place in the world where it's not established, as a preliminary measure to the reinstitution of the Islamic Caliphate. And what they do target is basically the Western way of life. And the reason the United States is a big target is because we are deemed to be the number one obstacle to their ultimate goal.
You say the criminal justice system is not equipped to handle these problems?
Well, you're right. The second goal of the book, or the second theme, I think, of the book, other than coming to grips with the Islamic ideology that is at the root of all this terrorism, is the fact that it's folly to think that you can protect a country, especially a country such as ours, by using the criminal justice system as the point of your counterterrorism spear. During the 8 years between the time the World Trade Center was bombed in 1993 until the complex was finally destroyed on 9/11, we had about 9 terrorism trials. And through those trials, we managed to take out exactly 29 terrorists in 8 years, during a period of time when the country was being audaciously attacked about once a year, attacks that in ferocity that led to ultimately the 9/11 attack. And a time during which our intelligence tells us that the enemy was not only getting more fierce and more bold, but also bigger. And I don't think that you might be able to say that terrorism trials work as a matter of due process, if that's what your main concern is. Yes, we can bring terrorists into the system and give them a fair trial. But I think when most people in America are asked, does the criminal justice system work for terrorism, they mean as a counterterrorism strategy. And as a matter of national security, you can't have a situation where you have a deadly threat, which may actually even ultimately be an existential threat to the United States, have it challenge you the way that we were challenged throughout the 1990s, and content yourself with taking out 29 people in 8 years. And most of them, but for a few exceptions, the lowest level terrorists. I frequently point out to people that, for example, Osama bin Laden's been under indictment in this country since June of 1998. That's before the bombings of the American embassies in East Africa, before the bombing of the USS Cole, before the Millennium Plot on Los Angeles International Airport, and before 9/11. Adding additional counts to the indictment doesn't seem to have deterred him much. So you really can't have an effective national security strategy that relies too much on the criminal justice system. The criminal justice system has its role, but it can never be, I think, the paramount response. And, look, since we've used the military after 9/11, you can argue that there's a lot of things that tactically and even strategically were dubious to do in the post-9/11 effort. I personally have my hesitation about this whole effort to democratize the Muslim world, which I think is a dubious project for a variety of reasons. But one thing you can argue with is that the best way of taking out terrorists is to capture or kill them. That is just simply a fact. And there have been many days in the last 7 years since 9/11 when we've taken out more people in a single day, killed and captured more people in a single day, whether it's in Iraq or Afghanistan, than were taken care of in the whole 8 years between 1993 and 2001. And when you ask yourself, how come we haven't been attacked again since 9/11, look, some of it is luck, but a lot of it is that we're actually killing and capturing the people who were threatening to us in a way that we didn't do in the 1990s. But the other real problem with using the criminal justice system is it's really counterintuitive if you think about it in terms of what your assumptions are when you use the criminal justice system versus what your assumption should be in the context of a national security problem. Our criminal justice system is the envy of the world precisely because we give defendants who are, presumed to be, at least when the system is drawn up, you think that you're mostly going to be dealing with American citizens. It's the system that brings law and order to our own body politic. Our theory in it is that we would prefer to see government lose. That is, that we would actually prefer to see the guilty go free than have a situation where innocent people are railroaded. And as a result, the design of it is that you want to give every bounce of the ball to the defendants. You want to basically set up presumptions of innocence and privacy so that the government has a heavy burden before it can convict someone and remove his liberty or search somebody's house. You have to go through a court and persuade them that there's evidence of an actual crime before you're allowed to ransack somebody's home, for example, to try to collect evidence. We assign counsel to people in order to make sure the government's put to its maximum burden. And we really do those things precisely because we want to make sure before we take the liberty away, particularly from an American, that the government has satisfied members of the community that somebody warrants that type of treatment. So you're starting from a premise that you would rather see government lose than see somebody railroaded. I think that's a wonderful thing if you're dealing with people who are properly in our criminal justice system. But when you're dealing with a national security problem, people who are outside our body politic, who are foreign threats to the United States, who want to kill Americans, you simply can't take the position that we take in the criminal justice system that you would prefer to see government lose. That's a situation in which we have to want government to prevail, because if it doesn't, then the system that protects our civil liberties, the ones that we cherish, the ones that make America America, if that system fails, those liberties aren't worth the paper they're written on. The problem that you have when you use the criminal justice system is, or when you treat your national security problems as if they were mere legal problems, is that you're actually using a variety of assumptions about how the people you're targeting should be treated, which were never intended to be used in the national security context, beginning with presuming your enemies, the people who mean you harm, to be innocent.
Andrew McCarthy, once again, God help us all, but thanks for being on the Savage Nation.